Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today I'm going to be doing what I think is the final episode in my question and answer mini-series. Thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for these wonderful and thought-provoking questions. Today I'm going to start with Stuart Griffin 1001, my dear friend Stuart. Stuart says, what do you think the Pat from when you started your channel would think about where your channel is now? What are your expectations on where your channel will be a year from now? Are there growing pains, such as answering all the comments you get? Has that become difficult? Are you monetized? Do you have any video ideas you are considering trying? Thank you, Stuart, for all of those questions. The Pat from the beginning would be in a state of total disbelief. Never did I imagine that anything like what has happened with the channel would happen. A year from now, well, I hope that the people who have joined me recently will still be with me and will still be finding value in the channel. I hope that I'm still able to read as much as I am able to read now. I don't take that for granted. I want to keep doing some of the kinds of videos that I have been doing, like wrap-ups and book reviews and Poetry Thursday and Tag Tuesday. But I would like to find some other features that I can bring to the channel as well. I've never tried to do my own live stream. I've been a guest on live streams, but I've never tried to do one myself. And I'm very nervous about that. I should probably give shorts a try again. I had some bad experiences with shorts in the early days of the channel, but I might give that a try again at some point. And answering comments, that has not become a difficulty at all. That's one of the things I love the most about having a channel. The only difficult part for me in comments is that sometimes the discussion goes back and forth several times, and I don't get notified about that, so I don't know that somebody has commented a second or third or even more. In a thread. So that's the only difficulty. Sometimes I'm late to getting back to, a conversation that has had many parts to it. But the initial comments, I think I'm still very able to answer all of those and to respond, and I love that. That's one of the things I love the most about the channel. Monetization, I just recently monetized the channel. I understood almost nothing about monetization, and it was my dear friend Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading who explained to me why I needed to monetize the channel, because that would give me control over what kind of ads are on my videos and where in the videos they are placed. I didn't understand that. YouTube is going to put ads on my videos whether I'm monetized or not. But by being monetized, I can then say where I want the ads to go, what kind of ads I want, or if on a particular video I don't want any ads, I can say no ads. You don't have that kind of control if you're not monetized. So that was the reason for my monetizing, and I just did this last month. Okay. KH20126 asks a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to try to answer all of these. Number one, what does a typical day of reading look like, and how do you pace yourself on your monthly reading goals? I don't think I pace myself particularly well. I do read early in the morning, I read late in the afternoon, and I read in the evening as well. I tend to have a schedule for each day if I'm going to be home of what I want to read that day, but it's loose. I don't necessarily stick to it, but I just like to remind myself of what it is that I'm participating in. I usually make videos in the late morning hours. I don't think I pace myself on events very well at all. Number two, have you had any interesting interactions with former students or colleagues about your channel? Many. I have many former students and former colleagues who are subscribers and who appear regularly in my comments, and I love that. Number 3, how do you purge your bookshelf or store your book collection? I don't think I do that very well either, but I am working on it. I do have a lot of books stored in my basement, and I'm little by little working my way through those and donating those to my local library. I have a library upstairs, and I'm also trying to clean that up, and I don't think I'm doing a very good job. And of course, the minute I donate a book, I suddenly, something comes up where I need to find that book. But I have been donating several bags of books a week to my local library just to try to get this under control. And mostly I donate things that I think I'm not going to read again, or things that I have multiple copies of. Number 4, have you thought about doing a field trip for your viewers, your favorite library, and interview a librarian or a local bookstore owner? I think you would be fantastic, thank you, just for fun or a possible future video idea. It is a great idea. I also think it might be beyond my capabilities right now, but certainly something I would consider for the future. Number 5, which author of the past do you think would have made an excellent YouTube vlogger? Well, I think any number of them. A lot of booktubers talk about the fact that they're actually introverts. I certainly am actually an introvert. So I think a lot of writers from the past would probably, who we think of as being maybe isolated or introverted, I think they probably would make great YouTubers or booktubers. Emily Dickinson, she could have had a great poetry channel. I would certainly follow a channel of the Bronte sisters, and I would follow Jane Austen as well. Number 6, if you could create a travel itinerary involving your favorite novel settings, what would it include? Well, I actually think about this. I want to go back to Ireland, and I want to focus on literary Dublin, and I would love to just trace some of the settings of James Joyce's works. And hopefully I will get to do that someday. Okay, Heather reads. Heather says, clearly you loved being a teacher. Were there any aspects of the job that you found difficult? If someone were considering a career in teaching, what top 3 pointers would you like them to bear in mind? What I found difficult was the increasing degree of bureaucratic nonsense we had to deal with in teaching. And I think this is probably true of any profession. As the years went on, we would have to document absolutely everything that we did in order to prove that we were, in fact, effective teachers and that our students were making progress. Every profession has these kinds of things, has, the system of metrics where you have to basically document your work, your progress. But so much of teaching is really about human interactions, and it's about it's an art form, and it's hard to document on a computer platform so much of what we actually did in any given day, week, month, year. So that became increasingly burdensome, and I think any teacher would probably tell you that. For most of my career, I worked in schools that valued teachers and teacher leaders. I'm not so sure that that's still the case today. I would tell young teachers going into the profession that you will work harder than you could ever imagine, especially when you're just starting out and have no materials created yet and you're doing everything for the first time. But the rewards, when you see growth and change in your students, well, those are unlike anything anything that you could have imagined. I would also advise young teachers to pay attention to what the older, seasoned teachers have to say and what they are doing. Get a great mentor early on among seasoned professionals. Listen and observe. You don't know everything when you're starting out. And finally, I would tell any young teacher what my mentor, Harriet, told me when I started out as a 21-year-old. She said to me, never forget that every child in your care is someone's beloved child. Even if they're not acting like it, even if they're not acting beloved. She said, remember, this is somebody's precious child, and you have been given an enormous responsibility to be entrusted with some part of their education, and treat it as the sacred trust that it is. So that would be my advice to young teachers starting out. Okay. MBX3648 says, your reading of Joyce's biography leads me to a few questions. Do you have any other recommendations for literary biographies, ones you particularly enjoyed? Do you also read or collect literary diaries, journals, and collections of letters? This has been a favorite genre of mine since my teens. Yes, Richard Ellman's biography of James Joyce is absolutely brilliant, and I can't recommend it enough. And his biographies of Oscar Wilde and W.B. Yeats are also highly acclaimed. I've also loved a recent biography of the poet Adrienne Rich by Hilary Holiday. The poet Paul Mariani is also a great biographer of other poets, including William Carlos Williams and John Berryman. Jay Perini's biography of Robert Frost is wonderful. He's written bios of a lot of writers, many writers. I think he's got one on Steinbeck and one on Faulkner, and he's got a bunch. I do like to read literary letters and diaries. I have loved Dorothy Wordsworth's journals and also Virginia Woolf's diaries. Joanna Burgess, 825. Did you ever teach adult education? No, I never did. I have never taught adult education. I did run a book group at my school for teachers and parents when I was teaching, where we read books that were relevant to working with and living with teenagers. But that's the closest that I've come to teaching in adult education. LEWP3 says, a couple of my book favorites are Stoner by John Williams and So Long, See You Tomorrow by William Maxwell. Are those books any type of genre you've discussed and I've just not found them as yet? I look forward to whatever you decide to bring. No, I'm afraid I have not read either one of those, so there's nothing on my channel about those yet. Stoner is definitely on my radar. I've seen many people talking about that novel on their channels, and it is, a book that's out there as something that I want to read. But no, you haven't missed that yet. I haven't gotten to those yet. Okay, my dear friend, Too Tight Lautrec asks, do you remember the first book you taught? If so, how did that lesson go for you? Which takes more time, reading, making videos, responding to comments? When I was doing my student teaching, I was teaching several different courses at the same time, and the very first books that I taught in those classes were Shakespeare's Macbeth, John Knowles' A Separate Piece, and Elie Wiesel's Night, in 3 different levels of 10th grade English. I don't know how they went exactly. But I guess they went well enough that I decided that yes, I still wanted to become a teacher after that professional semester. I was a very earnest student. What I remember is that although I was a college student, I was a college senior when I was doing my student teaching. Student teaching was like having a full-time job, and I worked at it around the clock, 7 days a week. I was so afraid of not being prepared enough or running out of material that I over-prepared for every single class. And I think that's just part of my character. Which takes more time? Reading takes the greatest amount of time, and I'm not a particularly fast reader. I think I'm kind of on like the slow to average side in terms of speed. I read for hours every day. Then making videos, that takes the second most amount of time, and it takes me a long time. It takes, I prepare, as you do, too tight. It takes me hours and hours to prepare for every video. My videos usually post at midnight my time, not always, but usually that's when I set them to post. And I start responding to comments when I wake up in the morning, usually at 5 a.m. And sometimes it can take me an hour to an hour and a half to respond to the first round of comments. And then I do some reading, and then I go to the gym. The hardest part about responding to comments, as I said, is keeping up with an ongoing conversation. If somebody leaves me a comment and I respond and then they respond again, sometimes I don't see that right away, and I find them sometimes days later because I don't get notifications about that. But I love responding to comments. I think that's wonderful. Linda Hall, 8096, my dear friend Linda. Have you ever read anything by C.S. Lewis? And if so, which one is your favorite? The only thing I've read by C.S. Lewis would be the Chronicles of Narnia, and that was a long, long time ago. But I haven't read any of C.S. Lewis's any of his religious writings or any of the things that he's written for adults. My dear friend Melinda at A Web of Stories says, are there any books that you read because your students recommended them to you? What did you think of those books? Absolutely, absolutely. I get recommendations from my students all the time. I still do. I did when I was teaching. A former student was the first to recommend Robin Hobb's Farseer series to me. Although I've only read the first book, that came to me from a former student. And I liked it very much. A former student also recommended the YA novels of Rebecca Stead, and I liked those as well. A former student recommended Peng Shepard's The Cartographers to me, and I loved that book also. I chat with a couple of my former students pretty regularly on Voxer. They keep me posted about what their book group, there's a whole bunch of my former students who are in a book group together, and they let me know what they're reading, and I let them know what my group is reading, which is a bunch of their former teachers. We keep in touch. My former students are anywhere from, young adults in their early 20s to more mature adults in their actually some of them are in their early 60s right now. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing to me. Okay. My dear friend Gareth at Books, Songs, and Other Magic says, are you interested in philosophy? And if so, what philosopher do you find interesting? And can you think of a funny thing that happened to you or that you witnessed as a teacher over the years? Hope those two questions are okay. Big hugs. I actually haven't really read a lot of philosophy not seriously, not since I have been out of school. But I just recently read with Angelia at Read and Reread. We did a buddy read of Madeleine Tien's new novel, The Book of Records. And one of the main characters in that book is the philosopher Hannah Arendt. And that made me want to read her. And she wrote a great deal about authoritarianism, and I think that that's especially relevant right now. And I did just buy a collection of her readings, so that I haven't gotten to it yet, but that is a philosopher, a modern philosopher that I want to read. Funny things that happened in my teaching days. I think I could write a book about this. Kids made me laugh. They kept me laughing. They kept my sense of humor, on its toes. So many funny things. I could do a video just about funny things that happened in classes, but I'll just tell one little funny story. When I was a first-year teacher, I was 21. I was very, very young. Some of my students were seniors. They were 18. Okay, so I was closer in age to them than I was to anybody on the staff. And one day, a French teacher went home sick in the middle of the day, and I was asked to just go and sit in on her senior French class. I was asked to just cover the class, basically sit with them until the end of the period because I couldn't teach French. And so I did, and I was, there was an assignment I was told to give the kids, and I gave them the assignment, and they were doing it. And then all of a sudden, a substitute teacher showed up, and I guess the principal had gotten somebody, an actual substitute to come so that, the regular teachers didn't have to continue to cover this woman's classes. So this woman walked in, and she didn't believe that I was a teacher. And she spoke very rudely to me, thinking I was a kid up in front of the room who had somehow taken over the class in the absence of Madame, I won't say her name. And I tried to explain to this woman that I was an English teacher, but I looked very young. I was only 21, and the seniors, and they were my students too, like they were in my English class too. They basically joined with the substitute teacher, and they started saying, come on, that's not nice to take advantage of a substitute teacher. And even though they never did this in class, they called me by my first name as if I was a senior, and they said, you need to stop being mean to the substitute. Come on, Pat. You're not the teacher. And I was so insulted. I picked up my stuff and I walked out of the room. But it was really funny when I thought about it later. And later, the substitute realized that I was a real teacher and that she had just totally blown my credibility in front of the seniors. And she came to me to apologize for making me look foolish in front of my students. And, I guess I was gracious about it. I don't know. But that was a funny thing. But there were, there were so many. I really should do a video just on funny things that happened in the classroom. Okay. My friend Mark, the book thing, says, my question is, what has been the biggest pleasant surprise? No, wait, you've said that since joining BookTube, you've read things that you never would have read before. My question is, what has been the biggest pleasant surprise, whether that's genre, book, or author? I've been talking a lot about how I've been reading science fiction pretty intensely, and that has been a pretty wonderful new discovery for me over the past more than 2 years now, so it's not really that new. I've also been really surprised that I have dabbled in the horror genre, and I've had a lot of fun with that, because never would I have thought that I would be a reader of anything but the most classics of horror fiction. I don't read really gross things. I don't read anything really disturbing, but I like some fun, spooky stuff. And I guess that has been the biggest surprise. Okay, Lily Bug's Library says, I have two questions. When you aren't reading, what do you like to do in your spare time? Also, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? Well, I've talked about this in a bunch of other questions too. I'm pretty big into fitness. I go to the gym 6 days a week. I'm very into working out and living a healthy life. I also like to walk and to hike, outside of the gym. I do what everybody else does. I love to dine out with family and friends. I used to take more advantage of living very close to New York City. I've lived just outside of New York City most of my life, but I do that much less nowadays. Travel. I'm planning a trip to England right now. I definitely want to plan another trip to Ireland, but my big travel plans right now are England, then Italy, which is where my mother's family is from, and then Ireland again. And in the United States, I frequently travel to Vermont. I have a lot of family in Vermont, and that's where I went to college and to graduate school. Okay, Maria Andrea at Books and Bocadillos. Do you have a current reading ritual? How have your reading rituals and daily reading rhythms changed since you came into the BookTube community? My reading has increased tremendously since becoming a part of the BookTube community. First, I read more than I ever did before because I'm very easily influenced by the delightful things that are going on here. There are so many events, and while I'm trying to get that under control and maybe curtail my participation, they do tend, the events that I participate in do tend to dictate my reading. I have a list every day of what I hope to read. I spend many hours a day reading, usually starting very early in the morning. I have special books, though, that I only read at certain times of the day. I can only read certain things at night. I can't read anything that's going to, really disturb me or prevent me from sleeping in my night reading. But I make a list every day of what I'm reading, and then I decide what I'm going to read that day, or what I'm going to focus on that day. Okay, my dear friend Jack at Spread Book Joy. Jack asks, do you have a literary travel wish list? Answer that in any way you see fit. And related to that, which cultural or social experiences, travel, theater, art, etc., related to books have had the biggest impact on you? And finally, in your teaching experience, what are your top tips for encouraging children and young people to read for pleasure? Well, as I've said in a couple of questions now, my friends that I travel to Ireland with, we are now planning a literary England trip. And I hope to meet you in person, Jack, when we get there. As I've said in other questions, I also want to go back to Ireland, and I want to do a literary Dublin trip as well. Growing up and continuing really to live near New York City, that has had a profound impact on me because I could always take advantage of live theater, live music, and museums. I don't take advantage nearly as much as I used to, but there was a time in my life when I went into New York City every week, and I've lived just outside of New York forever. I was always delighted when I found high school kids who were still able to read for pleasure. I think, sadly, in the U.S. anyway, it is harder for kids to read for pleasure by the time they get to high school. They read for pleasure in elementary school and even in middle school. And in fact, many of them lament the fact that they have had to stop reading for pleasure in high school. And part of that is simply the demands on their time. They have huge, course loads, academic course loads, and extracurricular school lives, and there's the social media pressures as well. Phones and technology have taken kids away from reading. I wish, as a teacher, that I had been better about encouraging kids to read for pleasure. We used to try to do that with our summer reading lists, where we increasingly made lists that were kid-friendly, and we used to enlist the help of kids in putting those lists together, where we would ask kids to, evaluate the books that they read for pleasure and to make suggestions for our lists, for the following year. A lot of kids like to participate in that, and I was encouraged by that. And I am encouraged because I am in touch with so many of my former students now that they are adults. I am encouraged to see that even if they didn't read for pleasure a lot in high school, they are reading for pleasure now as adults, now that they're the pressures of high school and college, now that they don't have those pressures. My friend Ina at ISA Boyd asked a similar question, and she is also an English teacher. She says, as a fellow English teacher, my question is, what is the thing that helped you the most to get teenage students to read for pleasure outside of curricular readings? I find this to be particularly challenging. And that would be the same as I answered Jack's question. It is very, very difficult. And kids used to, say that they were really sad that they couldn't read more for pleasure. I mean, these were kids who liked to read, but they didn't have time in their days. And I could have done better at encouraging reading for pleasure. But as I said in the last question, trying to enlist their advice and their suggestions, was a way of keeping their pleasure reading, making clear that it was important and that I valued it, and that I valued their suggestions for other kids, making them a part of the process. And as I said, I am encouraged that kids who, like to read and didn't have time to read do become readers again when they are out of school and they have time to read, non-academically. Okay, and Emma VD says, my question as a fellow teacher who is about to retire, did you manage in your career to teach literary works you didn't like in such a way as not to influence your students' attitude towards them? I never really taught anything that I didn't like. As I've said in other responses to other questions, I did teach many things that I thought were difficult, that I thought kids were going to find difficult, but that's not the same as not liking something. I would try to get kids psyched for the challenge. I would let them know that this is tough. This is really hard, but I know you can do it. I know that you're up to the task. I prided myself as a teacher in being a real, authentic person in the classroom. But at the same time, I kept my personal opinions about things out of the work of the classroom. I do think that my enthusiasm for works, even works that I knew were going to be difficult, I think that had a kind of contagious effect, not on every kid, but on a lot of kids. I could get kids psyched up to read something, even something that I knew was going to be a challenge, because I brought a certain a certain level of enthusiasm to the work. So that's it. We have completed the question and answer mini-series. I thank you all for staying with me. I thank you for these wonderful, wonderful questions, and thank you for being a part of my BookTube experience and being here on the channel with me. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.